I was standing in my kitchen when the email arrived, just a routine update from the probate clerk, or so I assumed. I clicked it absent-mindedly, still stirring my tea, until one sentence froze me in place so completely that the spoon slipped from my fingers and clattered against the tile. Final disbursement of the remaining $400,312.54 has been completed to the assigned beneficiaries. Remaining? Completed? Beneficiaries? My heart thudded once, slow, heavy, a sound I felt more than heard. I scrolled down, blinking, confused. There were 3 names listed. My cousins, Amelia and Dean, and a third-line item marked previously satisfied expense by M. Reed. That's me. But the figure next to my name was 0. 0. I read the email again, as if repetition could conjure a different truth. But the numbers didn't lie. The estate, the one I had been handling for nearly 2 years, the one I had been paying legal bills for out of my own pocket, had been quietly closed. And the entire remaining fund, every cent of my grandmother's hard-earned savings, had been split between my cousins without a single phone call to me. I stood there with my hand pressed against the counter, steadying myself as something tight and electric wound itself through my chest. Not grief. Not shock. Something colder. Sharper. Like ice forming on the inside of my ribs. 2 years. 2 years of conference calls, notarized documents, attorney messages at 6 a.m., filing fees, courier fees, records requests. Everything routed through me because my grandmother had named me executor. And I did it because I loved her. Because she trusted me. Because no one else stepped up. And while I was draining my retirement account to keep the process moving, those 2, people who called me family only when it was convenient, had been quietly maneuvering behind me. They'd cut a side deal with the attorney, filed a petition I was never informed of, somehow convinced the court that my responsibilities were concluded, then waited for the money to flow into their accounts like water from a tap they felt entitled to. $400,000. My grandmother's last gift. Her legacy. Her hope that we would remain connected, bonded, strengthened by her memory. Instead, it had been carved up like prey. My phone buzzed with a new notification. A text, Dean of all people. Hey cuz, hope you are doing okay. Been meaning to catch up. Catch up. My hand trembled, not from weakness, but from clarity. Something inside me clicked into place with the precision of a lock sliding open. They thought I wouldn't find out. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I was still the version of myself who bent to keep the family peace. But the moment I read that probate line item, the woman I used to be broke like glass. And the woman beneath, the one who paid attention, who documented everything, who had survived worse, rose to the surface. I picked up my phone and opened a new note. Phase 1, gather every document. If they thought I would walk away, they were about to learn exactly who they had underestimated. And I was just getting started. My name is Margaret Reed, though most people simply call me Maggie. I'm 62 years old, a retired high school English teacher with a fondness for black tea, wool cardigans, and long, foggy morning walks. I've lived most of my life in the same quiet suburb, the sort of place where neighbors wave from their driveways and the grocery clerks know exactly which bread you buy each Thursday. In other words, I'm not the sort of woman anyone expects to make waves. And for most of my life, I didn't. I taught my classes, graded endless essays, raised my daughter, tended to my home, and cared for my aging parents as best I could. Responsibility came naturally to me. Confrontation did not. I was the type who smoothed tension, not created it. When family disagreements flared, I was the one who sat everyone down with a pot of tea. But age shapes a person, and loss shapes them even more. When my parents passed, my grandmother, Eleanor, became the anchor in my life. She was a sturdy woman, sharp-witted into her 90s, with hands always busy, knitting, gardening, kneading bread, sorting photographs into albums only she fully understood. She used to say, "Legacy isn't about what you leave. It's about how they carry you forward." I believed her. When she fell ill, I moved into her home for the last 6 months to care for her. Not because anyone asked, because I couldn't imagine doing otherwise. My cousins visited sporadically, birthdays, major holidays, the occasional Sunday lunch if it didn't interfere with their plans. They smiled, brought flowers, and left after 40 minutes. I stayed through the long nights when she forgot where she was. Through the mornings she could barely lift a fork. Through the quiet afternoons when she simply wanted someone in the room. Before she passed, she asked me to sit beside her bed. Her voice was weak, cracked like old porcelain. "You're the one I trust to close things properly," she whispered. The others mean well, but they scatter. You stay. And so she named me executor. I took the role seriously, methodically, respectfully, even when the paperwork felt endless, even when the attorney charged fees for breathing near a document, even when my cousins were nowhere to be found when signatures were needed or court dates shifted. I never once imagined they would resent me for it. But grief reveals character. And money reveals everything else. In retirement, my life is quiet enough that deception echoes. The absence of honesty rings louder than truth itself. So when I saw that probate email, I didn't just feel betrayed by my cousins. I felt betrayed on behalf of my grandmother. She trusted them with her memory. They trusted me to stay silent. They miscalculated. As I sat at my dining table that evening, a stack of binders and letters spread before me, I felt something I hadn't in years, a steady flame of purpose warming my chest. Not rage, not vengeance. Purpose. I may have been the quiet one in the family, but quiet does not mean weak. Silence does not mean blind. And this time, I wouldn't be smoothing things over. This time, I was going to tell the story exactly as it happened, and make sure the truth did what it needed to do. My family has always been a study in contrasts. On one hand, there's me, steady, methodical, with both feet firmly planted on the ground. On the other, there are my cousins, Amelia and Dean. They are siblings, for years apart but eerily similar in temperament. Charming when they need to be, evasive when responsibility enters the room, and united in a way that once felt enviable, until I understood its cost. Growing up, they were the glossy ones. Amelia with her glossy hair, glossy smile, glossy future as she floated from one interest to another like a butterfly that never decided which flower to land on. Dean was the same, though he cloaked his uncertainty in humor. They were never cruel, just effortless, in a way that people who've never been relied upon often are. I, meanwhile, was the designated helper, the one the adults trusted, the one who stayed behind to clean the kitchen after holidays while the cousins slipped away to the backyard with excuses they probably believed were convincing. My grandmother saw it all with clear eyes, though she rarely commented. She had that old-fashioned philosophy of letting people reveal themselves through time. They'll learn, she'd say with a shrug, or life will teach them. Still, I believed family held together through effort. So I kept trying. When Amelia needed a place to stay after her first divorce, I let her use my guest room for 3 months. When Dean's business venture collapsed, I helped him rewrite his resume. When their mother fell ill, I coordinated the care schedule, though in truth I covered nearly all the shifts. I told myself it was simply what family did. Quietly, I hoped that one day they would show the same loyalty in return. But loyalty isn't taught through words. It's modeled, and they had never been asked to bear real weight. Not until my grandmother's estate. When she died, Amelia cried dramatically at the funeral, folding into my arms as if I were her only tether. Dean cracked jokes about how Grandma was probably rearranging the heavens. Yet when it came to the practical work, the paperwork, the appointments, the legal labyrinth that follows death, they disappeared like mist. Just loop us in, Dean had said vaguely. Tell us where to sign, Amelia added. Loop them in. Tell them where to sign. As if that formed the sum total of responsibility. What I didn't realize then was how closely they watched from the shadows. How carefully they calculated what would be mine, what would be theirs, and what they believed they deserved more. Family can love you while undervaluing you. They can smile while quietly deciding you owe them your labor. They can claim closeness while exploiting the spaces where you bend. I didn't know yet the full extent of the scheme they'd orchestrated. But I did know this. I had given them every chance to be honest. And they had taken every chance to be silent. As I poured myself another cup of tea that night, I felt the subtle shift inside my chest. The one that occurs when affection meets reality and must choose which to carry forward. I wasn't done uncovering the truth. And the next part was where everything began to unravel. It began with a single discrepancy. While combing through my files, I noticed that one of the attorney's invoices, dated 8 months earlier, referred to a petition I had never seen. A request for partial distribution, supposedly submitted on behalf of all beneficiaries. All beneficiaries. Yet my signature was nowhere on it. My approval nowhere mentioned. Instead, there was a line stating, "Executor notified and consenting by counsel." I felt the old teacher in me rise, the one who knew when a student's essay felt suspiciously unfamiliar. Something was wrong. I clicked open my email archives, searching for correspondence. Nothing. I dug out my paper records. Nothing. If I had been notified, it would have been here. Then there was the bank statement, one I had never received directly but found tucked inside a packet from the probate office. It showed a withdrawal of $40,000 labeled legal reserves satisfied. That money had been removed from the estate long before final distribution. Why hadn't I known? I read further. The partial distribution had occurred 2 months after that. My cousins had each received $20,000. Quietly, neatly, without so much as a text message. I sank back in my chair. This wasn't just oversight. It was coordination. I checked the attorney's involvement. He'd been hired initially by me, on behalf of the estate, to navigate the probate process. But somewhere along the way, my cousins had started communicating with him directly. They'd met with him, submitted documents to him, and apparently convinced him they had my authorization. But the signature on one form, my signature, was not mine. My stomach tightened. I'd seen enough forged signatures in my teaching days to know the difference. Minuscule slant changes, inconsistent pressure, letter shapes too rigid. Whoever had attempted this had underestimated how closely I examined details. The betrayal bloomed slowly in my chest, like a bruise spreading under the skin. They hadn't just taken money. They had erased my role, my effort, my sacrifice, my grandmother's trust. Over $400,000 had been divided between them. And because I had already paid nearly $18,000 in attorney fees and filing expenses personally, they effectively allowed me to subsidize their inheritance. A dull ringing filled my ears. I thought of my grandmother's hands, the way she used to rest them on mine when she was tired. I thought of her voice, raspy those last weeks, saying, "You stay steady, Maggie. You always stay steady." I closed my eyes and let the truth settle. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a clerical error. It wasn't even just greed. It was exploitation disguised as family obligation. They assumed I wouldn't question anything. They assumed that because I had always been the responsible one, I would continue being the silent one. They assumed wrong. When I opened my eyes, the ringing had quieted. In its place was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. If they were comfortable taking what wasn't theirs, then I would become comfortable reclaiming what was mine. And I knew exactly where to begin. The next morning, I began my investigation with the precision of someone who had spent decades grading essays. Every document became a clue. Every email a thread. Every missing communication a question demanding an answer. First, I made a chronological timeline. Events, dates, actions taken, funds moved. Each entry illuminated gaps between what I was told and what actually occurred. Second, I pulled out my grandmother's will, the original copy, kept in a weathered leather folder she'd entrusted to me years before she died. The phrasing was simple, equal shares among the 3 grandchildren. But it also included a specific clause. Executor shall remain fully informed and consenting in all matters of estate allocation. They violated that. Next, I began compiling evidence. Not for confrontation. No, not yet, but for accuracy. For truth. That's something my grandmother taught me. Never confront empty-handed. I contacted the probate clerk and requested certified copies of every document filed over the past year. Most matched my records, but a few were new to me, forms stamped months after I believed all filings were complete. One in particular made my breath hitch. A final consent of executor, with a signature that looked like mine only if examined 3 feet away in dim lighting. I scheduled an appointment with a new attorney, one I chose myself, unaffiliated with my cousins. Her name was Charlotte Briggs, a sharp, incisive woman in her mid-40s with a voice like a clean blade. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable but focused. When I finished, she folded her hands. "Ms. Reed, what happened here isn't procedural oversight. It's misrepresentation, potential fraud, and depending on the attorney's involvement, possibly malpractice." The word fraud made something in me settle. Not intensify, settle. Like the ground beneath my feet had finally stopped shifting. Charlotte examined the photocopied signature. "This is not a match," she said flatly. "A handwriting expert could confirm it." She leaned back. "We'll start with a demand for a full accounting. Legally, you're entitled to it. If they refuse, or if the numbers don't match, we escalate." I nodded. Calmly. Steadily. For the first time since discovering the theft, I felt aligned with myself again. Before leaving her office, I handed her a binder, tabs, labels, cross-referenced notes, everything organized with near-military precision. She lifted an eyebrow. You came prepared. I smiled faintly. I've had a lot of practice. Back home, I continued gathering digital correspondence. Emails, screenshots, call logs, even text messages with my cousins that now read differently in hindsight. I stored everything in a secure cloud folder. I labeled it Grandmother's Legacy. While compiling evidence, another discovery surfaced. Amelia and Dean had used their distribution to make several large purchases. A renovated kitchen for Amelia. A new SUV for Dean. They hadn't just taken the money, they'd already spent much of it. They believed the matter was closed. Buried. But documentation is unyielding. Facts are loyal. And the truth, once collected and arranged properly, becomes a force. That night, I printed my timeline and pinned it above my desk. The end of the line was empty. Waiting. For the first time, I felt the tide shifting. Not emotionally, but strategically. They had taken what wasn't theirs. Now I was gathering everything necessary to take back what was mine. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. One of those gray, unremarkable days whose silence lets important decisions rise to the surface. I was reviewing Charlotte's drafted demand letter when a text from Amelia lit up my phone. Hey Maggie, do you have the recipe for Grandma's cranberry loaf? Dean and I want to make it for a little family reunion next week. Cranberry loaf. The audacity nearly stole my breath. Here they were, quietly spending my grandmother's money, forging my name, siphoning an estate I had spent years managing. And yet they wanted nostalgia. Warmth. Togetherness. As if they hadn't ripped apart the very foundation those memories rested on. My thumb hovered over the phone. For a moment, the old instinct rose. Answer kindly. Keep the peace. Don't create conflict. But peace is not maintained through silence. It's preserved through boundaries. And I realized something critical, something freeing. They were counting on the version of me they had always known. The agreeable one. The forgiving one. The one who assumed the best in people even when evidence pointed elsewhere. I set my phone down and looked at the documents spread across my table. They formed a story, not of greed alone, but of the years I had spent holding this family together while others took advantage of my steadiness. The old me would have rationalized their behavior. But the woman I had become, the woman shaped by loss, responsibility, and quiet endurance, knew better. That was my turning point. I reached for my phone, opened a new message thread with both cousins, and typed. We need to talk. I received notice that the estate was closed without my knowledge. I'm requesting a full accounting. I didn't accuse. I didn't insult. I stated a fact. The responses were immediate. From Dean, whoa, wait. This is a misunderstanding. Let's not make this dramatic. From Amelia, we thought the lawyer told you. Everything was handled months ago. Handled. Months ago. They had grown so comfortable lying that they no longer recognized when the truth towered above them. I replied calmly, I have legal counsel. We'll proceed formally. The typing bubbles appeared, vanished, reappeared. Digital panic captured in motion. Maggie, come on. Family doesn't threaten each other. Funny how accountability feels like a threat only to those who benefit from the absence of it. I didn't argue further. I didn't need to. My decision was already made. That evening, I signed Charlotte's engagement letter. She would file the accounting request first, followed by a petition to reopen probate if necessary. She would request handwriting analysis. She would demand attorney records. The process would be slow, methodical, precise. But justice, like my grandmother used to say, isn't hurried. It's constructed. I walked to my living room window. The street was quiet. A single street lamp flickered, a soft, amber glow that illuminated the sidewalk. I pressed my palm to the glass. Grandma, I whispered, I'm doing this for you. And for me. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking restoration. And there is a profound difference. 3 weeks later, the unraveling began. It started with the accounting demand. Legally, they had 30 days to respond. On day 12, Charlotte received a PDF of numbers so incomplete it bordered on insulting. No supporting documents. No bank statements. No explanation for missing funds. Charlotte sent a second request, firmer this time, citing statutory requirements. 7 days later, the attorney representing my cousins submitted a corrected accounting. But this one contained a glaring contradiction. The partial distribution dates didn't match the court filings. And the attorney listed as having notified me had no record of ever contacting me. Charlotte picked up her pen, tapped it twice on the desk, and said, This is falling apart faster than I expected. The next step was handwriting analysis. I delivered both my known signatures and the suspected forgery. It took the examiner 4 days to deliver a written report, and just a single sentence for me to understand the result. The questioned signature is not consistent with the handwriting of Ms. Reed. A forgery. Confirmed. Charlotte filed a motion to reopen probate. Word must have reached my cousins quickly, because Amelia left me a voicemail that night, voice trembling, layered with forced innocence. "Maggie, please call me. We didn't mean for any of this to go wrong. Can't we just fix this between us?" I saved the voicemail. Evidence. 2 days later, Dean emailed me claiming the attorney had misled them. Then, contradicting himself, he said he thought I didn't need the money anyway. That sentence alone nearly undid the calm I had built. But I stayed steady. For my grandmother, I stayed steady. Then came the state bar inquiry. Charlotte had quietly filed a complaint regarding the original attorney's conduct, misrepresentation, failure to communicate with the executor, and potential conflict of interest. The bar moved quickly. Faster, I think, than my cousins anticipated. The attorney who once brushed off my questions was suddenly forced to produce correspondence logs, records that did not exist. Phone call logs, none with my number. Signed forms, one of which was forged. Pressure reveals. And under pressure, people make choices that show exactly who they are. The attorney panicked first. He submitted a statement claiming my cousins misled him, that they provided the signature. In doing so, he shifted liability directly onto them. Charlotte read the statement aloud, then looked at me calmly. This is the beginning of their downfall. The court scheduled a hearing. My cousins were required to attend. I arrived early, dressed in navy and gray, simple, steady colors. They walked in 10 minutes late. Amelia's eyes were red. Dean kept his hands buried in his pockets as if he could hide inside them. The judge listened as Charlotte laid out the facts, unauthorized filings, missing notifications, a forged signature, unlawful distribution of over $400,000. My cousin's attorney stammered. My cousin said nothing. The judge's ruling was deliberate. Probate reopened. Funds frozen. Full accounting ordered. Potential surcharge against both cousins. Referral of forged documents to the county prosecutor. Silence filled the courtroom, thick and heavy. Their faces crumpled, not from remorse, but from consequence. That's the thing about ethical revenge. It doesn't require theatrics. It simply requires truth, revealed in the right order. And their own choices had become their undoing. The months that followed were unexpectedly quiet. The estate, once a source of anxiety and exhaustion, became a process I observed rather than carried. Charlotte handled the filings, the communications, the negotiations. My role was simply to provide clarity when asked. With the funds frozen, my cousins felt the first real consequences of their decisions. Amelia sold the renovated kitchen's custom appliances. Dean returned his SUV and took a penalty for early termination. They avoided me, no texts, no emails, no apologetic gestures. And I didn't chase them. For the first time in my life, I released the responsibility of maintaining a relationship that had never been reciprocal. The prosecutor eventually declined to pursue criminal charges. Lack of clear evidence about who physically forged the signature, but the civil penalties remained. My cousins were ordered to reimburse the estate for all misallocated funds, including the amount I had paid in legal fees. The judge approved executor compensation for me, citing extraordinary burden due to beneficiary interference. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was relief. One evening, after the estate matter was nearly resolved, I visited my grandmother's house. It had been empty for months, waiting for the legal clearance to be sold. I brought the keys, stepped inside, and let the familiar scent of lavender and wood settle around me. The rooms felt smaller than I remembered, but warmer too, like memory itself had become a kind of insulation. I walked through each room, touching the backs of chairs, the window frames, the worn banister. When I reached her bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed frame and let the weight of the past 2 years exhale from my shoulders. "I protected what you trusted me with," I whispered. Outside, the evening light filtered through the curtains, soft and gold. Peace found me there, quiet, unforced, steady. A week later, the estate closed properly. Legally. Transparently. My share was transferred to me. Every cent accounted for. Not because I fought for money, but because I fought for truth. My cousins sent a single message. "We're sorry for everything." I didn't respond. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't require reconciliation. It requires clarity. And I had found mine. My life returned to its gentle rhythm. Morning tea. Neighborhood walks. Long, reflective evenings with my books and quiet music. But something inside me had shifted, not hardened, but strengthened. I understood now that kindness without boundaries becomes self-erasure. And silence in the face of wrongdoing becomes permission. I was done being silent. As I stood on my porch one crisp morning, watching the sun rise behind the pines, I felt a sense of finality. Not an ending, just completion. Justice isn't loud. It's not vengeful. It's a steady, unwavering correction of what should never have been distorted. And in restoring my grandmother's legacy, I found my own. Looking back, the lesson wasn't about money at all. It wasn't even about betrayal, though betrayal was the vehicle that delivered the truth. The heart of it was something much deeper. People will treat you according to the boundaries you place, or fail to place. Silence invites assumption. Reliability without reciprocity invites exploitation. For 62 years, I believed that keeping peace meant absorbing discomfort. That being the responsible one meant carrying more than my share. That loyalty, once given, must be unwavering even when others mishandled it. But responsibility is not servitude. Loyalty is not blindness. And peace built on unequal footing is not peace. It is imbalance. When my cousins stole my grandmother's legacy, they underestimated the power of quiet people. They mistook gentleness for passivity. They believed I would smooth over their misconduct the way I had smoothed other tensions in the past. But age brings a clarity youth cannot hold. I have lived long enough to know that truth has its own momentum. Once set in motion, it does not stop. It reveals. It corrects. It restores. My revenge, if it can be called that, was simply this. I insisted on truth. I demanded accountability. I stood up for myself with calm, unwavering steadiness. And their downfall was not my doing. It was the natural consequence of their choices. If there is anything I want others to take from my story, any wisdom worth carrying, it is this. Do not shrink yourself to keep the peace. Do not assume silence is kindness. Do not let others decide the value of your effort. Document everything. Ask questions. Trust actions more than promises. And when betrayed, respond not with fury, but with clarity. The most ethical revenge is sunlight, clean, sharp, and revealing. My grandmother used to say, "Justice is simply truth with its sleeves rolled up." I understand that now more than ever, because in fighting for her legacy, I rediscovered my own strength. I did not become someone new. I became more fully the woman she always believed I was. And if you listening to this story have ever been the quiet one, the helper, the dependable one, the one taken for granted, I hope you take this with you. Your steadiness is not a weakness. Your boundaries are not cruelty. Your voice deserves to be heard. You are allowed to defend what is yours. You are allowed to demand fairness. You are allowed to walk away from those who only come close when it benefits them. My story ends not in bitterness, but in clarity. Not in vengeance, but in restoration. Not in broken family ties, but in strengthened self-respect. Peace is no longer something I maintain by bending. Peace is something I stand upright to protect. That is my grandmother's true legacy. And it is mine now too.